Greetings. In this segment, we are joined by Dr. Kristen Seefelt, a faculty member in the School of Social Work and School of Public Policy and an author of an award-winning book, Abandoned Families, Social Isolation in the 21st Century. Thank you for joining us today and sharing a little bit about your thoughts and your research.
Okay.
So I was wondering if we could start out by just having you tell us a little bit about your book and some of the key ideas.
Sure. So Abandoned Families kind of has two different prongs to it. One is a more academic prong, and then the other is much more of a policy focus. So social isolation, for those who aren't trained as sociologists, is a concept that was really talked about a lot by William Julius Wilson as it relates to poverty experienced in central cities. And so he was writing about this in the 1970s and 1980s, and his theory was that, because of a lot of different federal policies, because of segregation, because of the movement away of job opportunities, that a lot of central city poverty resulted. I took that as sort of a jumping off point because what we've seen over the last 20 years or so is really like a strong development of the labor market, but really in the low wage labor market. And lots of folks, and in particular lots of parents are working now, but they might not be working full time, they might not be working full year, and they might be paid very, very low wages. So I wanted to see, did Wilson's sort of social isolation theory still kind of hold today? What I ended up doing is interviewing about 45 women who lived in Southeast Michigan, most in and around Detroit, to just learn more about like what their experiences were. And by doing that, I discovered that Wilson's idea of social isolation, there's still some parts to it that are very important, and he is sort of the preeminent scholar in this area. But lots of things have changed too, and his idea was that if people had access to jobs, they'd have access to stable communities. And if they had access to stable communities, that would be a way to get, for people to kind of achieve a middle class lifestyle. But what I found was that folks were really sort of playing by all of the rules, that he assumed would lead to stability. They were working as much as they could, but the labor market was really changed. They were going to school, right? They were, but the landscape of higher education has really transformed in ways that were really quite detrimental. Many of them were buying homes and trying to invest in their own neighborhoods to achieve stability, but the mortgage products that they were offered were subpar. And then finally, when they didn't have enough income to just even meet their basic needs, the public safety net was really not there in a way to access like it should be. And so folks were taking on a lot of debt, using credit cards to pay bills, but also, taking out student loans to finance their education, even though they often weren't getting degrees. So the conclusion I ended up reaching was that these systems of sort of upward mobility just aren't working, and in particular they're not working for families of color. And we need to think about what does it mean to achieve if people can't achieve the American dream, it's not because of lack of trying, it's because of these fundamental changes in underlying institutions.
Sure. So just thinking, going a little bit more into some of the stories that you heard from the 45 women, I'm wondering if you could either share a couple examples of some of those individual stories just to help kind of the viewers get a deeper sense of what you were hearing.
Yeah. So one of the people I talk a lot about in the book is someone who I call Geneva, changed names and some details to protect her confidentiality. But Geneva, she grew up really poor as a child, but she had a good job. She was married. She and her husband owned a home on Detroit's East Side. They owned cars. She felt like she'd really achieved middle-class status. But one evening, she went into work. It was a horrible snowstorm. She slipped and fell in her employer's parking lot and was severely injured. Months of rehabilitation, but eventually she was able to come back to work, although she had some pretty significant medical debt by the time she returned to work. She just needed some accommodations, though. She needed, a chair to support her back. She needed to have a handicapped parking spot in the parking lot. Nothing too major, but her employer just really pushed back, and he gave her the special chair, but then took it away when he said that other employees were complaining about it. He was supposed to have moved her desk to be closer to the restroom, and he never did that. And he had said originally that he would make some accommodations around her needing to take time off, but eventually she was fired from her job. Even though we can look at federal law and say, she probably had a case for a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But when she lost her job, everything else kind of crumbled as well. She and her husband broke up. She didn't have any money to pay the mortgage, and they lost their house. It took a long time for her to secure public benefits through the disability system, and in the meantime she racked up enormous amounts of credit card debt. But I got to know Geneva over 6 years, and despite that very enormous setback, she was determined that she was going to get herself back on track. But unfortunately, she ended up being scammed into a mortgage for another home, and actually didn't even realize she was purchasing a home. She thought she was doing a rental agreement. And she tried to go back to school, and she did. She went back and she got a certificate in medical billing and coding, but she went to a for-profit institution, and when she finished the program, she had thousands of dollars in debt, and she was never able to find a job in that field. And the only job she found paid her just enough to make her ineligible for public benefits, but it made her actually worse off because she was spending more money on childcare and transportation, and was operating at a loss. But again, someone who was really trying to play by the rules. But the rules had changed, and no one had told her about that.
So, and you, in an example like that, you also see all the kind of intricacies of how one issue impacts another issue, and lacking safety nets. Yeah. How kind of one incident can lead to kind of a cascading set of other issues.
Absolutely. And from a policy standpoint too, I say this as someone who kind of came at this studying issues around the safety net, right? But it's not just one set of policy choices and changes to one system, right? It's all sorts of different systems that end up being interconnected and have a ripple effect, in this case in a very negative way, on a family.
Yeah. So jumping in then to the kind of the policy side of your book, how would you think about policy that could have better supported Geneva or some of the other people that you interviewed? So
that was actually, for me, writing the book, one of the hardest things to do, because we're often trained to think about what could really what changes could really make a difference. And in the end, I kind of came down to looking at all this, what was happening, and looking at sort of the history too, right? The history of racial residential segregation, which then manifests itself in the targeting of subprime mortgages to communities of color. Looking at the exclusion to traditional institutions of higher ed in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and now the predatory practices of for-profit institutions against, again, communities of color, made me think about like really reckoning with the racial aspect of all of this. And so I come down on the side of thinking about like we need to be thinking more about like reparations, right? That simply tweaking the rules of existing systems isn't going to help families who have been for decades systematically oppressed. And policy is often used in ways to oppress them. So a real reckoning with that history, I think, is due. And I think too, talking about reparations is something that we as white women who are in this profession also need to not be just letting that be something that our colleagues of color have to carry. That we need to be talking about these issues as well. So that is that's kind of, and there are lots of different ways that reparations could be implemented, and I would refer to the work of Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton, who have done some very thoughtful analyses of different ways that social policy could actually achieve that. Obviously, I would firmly be behind, better wages, and two ways of thinking about just giving workers more power too. I mean, I think Geneva's story really illustrates just how out of whack the power balance, has become between employers and employees. Unions are almost non-existent, now, and workers have so few tools at their disposal to go against, injustices that happen to them in the workplace.
Right. And I know that there's other scholarship that is specifically looking at kind of flexibility in the job market and ways even that schedules are created and how the implications of those for somebody like Geneva. So.
Yeah.
Great. Are there any so you wrote this book and it's been out in a couple years kind of from doing some of these interviews. Are there any thoughts that continue to remain with you and inform your work moving forward?
Yeah. To me, I'm someone who actually started off doing more kind of survey-based research and more quantitative analyses, and certainly through this process, it really drove home to me the importance of listening to people's stories and helping their stories and voices get shared, and putting faces and real experiences behind some of the numbers. I certainly use statistics and from government reports and other people's research, but to me, and I think this is where social work, is particularly well suited to cultivate this kind of work. Really hearing directly from folks who are experiencing the types of things that we're interested in learning about. So, I continue to do more of this type of work as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your book and about your research and sharing the voices of some of the people that you interviewed. Thank you very much, and thank you all for watching.